Hey, this is Brando from Appetite for Distortion, and you are listening to the Garrett Smith Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at episode 41, or as I should say, welcome to the podcast, because today we have Mr. Brando from Appetite for Distortion. And folks, y'all may not know this, but AJ Gell may have been the one to suggest I do a podcast, but I needed something to model it off of. And so without Brando, you would not have 41 episodes of this thing. So you can either thank him or blame him. But Brando, welcome to the podcast.
I'll take the blame, and thank you. I appreciate your time.
That's awesome.
Right on.
It's kind of funny. Right before you called, you had talked on the last episode of yours that I listened to that where you're talking about the Axl Rose being on Scooby-Doo and Bugs Bunny. And right before you called, I was killing a little bit of time. I was watching the brand new episode of Family Guy, and they're doing a Terminator spoof like they did with Star Wars. And I haven't finished the episode, so I don't know if the Guns N' Roses song will play in their version of the Terminator. However, they did a scene where Peter is he's doing karaoke with the Terminator Peter. And after they leave the stage, Herbert the pervert goes up and requests to sing Sweet Child of Mine. And then they cut to the next scene. So got somewhat of a GNR reference in there.
I look forward to that. I do watch Family Guy. I know Steven Adler has professed his love for Family Guy. So I haven't seen that one yet. I'm going to keep an eye out. That sounds interesting.
I think Adler and Nikki Sixx both watch it, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, Adler's definitely posted a few times about it. But
okay.
Other than watching cartoons and keeping up with Guns N' Roses, what have you been up to lately?
I just work a lot. It's not. It seems like the podcast kind of becomes a job, even though I love it, of course. And they always say it's not a job if you love what you do. But I have a job for iHeartRadio and Premier Radio Networks as a producer, kind of like behind the scenes for different kind of shows, different audio editing projects. So I work on that, and it's I don't know what the rumor is out there, but radio people don't make that much. Not everyone's Howard Stern. Let's put it that way. So I still have I have another job. I have no shame in saying that I've had part time or full time for 10 years. Where that you're wherever you are, you ever get you call your cable company or a credit card company, and you hear that voice that says, "This phone call may be monitored for quality assurance."
Oh yeah.
I work for a company that doesn't do the recording necessarily, but listens to calls, cable calls or, waste management calls, whatever. So I've been doing that to supplement my radio career for a decade. And oddly enough, it's shaped my career, my radio voice, because you listen to how people interact. So it's, in an odd way, it's kind of helped me, my interview style, listening to how people talk to each other. But just to tie it in. But yeah, so I work on that, and I have 3 cats. I live in Queens with my, now fiance, and she's a dance teacher, and I watch, New York sports. It's I try to keep myself kind of busy. It's always something more I can be doing, but I try to get sleep when I can.
That's actually pretty cool. When you were calling in, I knew it had to be you because I don't often get phone calls from New York, but up until this episode, I think Nashville and maybe Virginia were the farthest callers I had, except maybe California. So now New York, I believe, can take the cake on furthest somebody's called into the podcast. But
okay.
Yeah, you mentioned you got engaged recently. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. And the only reason, because I know everybody and their mother has a podcast, whatever, and bless all of us that we're on the same game, just trying to entertain ourselves and other people. But the only reason I mention it, and when you sent me the prep for the show, and I don't know if this is where you're kind of leading, is because it ties into music.
Totally, you're reading my mind.
Yeah, so I'm obviously there's a Guns N' Roses themed podcast, and there's a lot of rock band mentions. And, there's not a lot, you kind of search for content anywhere. And especially during the pandemic, what's relatable, and it's watching stuff at home together. You're stuck at home with your significant other or your family. Hopefully, that's a good thing to be at home with them. But so her love of Dave Matthews is kind of rivals my love of Guns N' Roses. So that kind of that's why I kind of bring it up to not just to say, "Hey, look at me, I'm getting I have a girlfriend."
Well,
but yeah, because people seem to think it's funny. So I'm glad.
Well, my listeners, and I guess I should have brought this up at the beginning. Most people who've listened to my podcast, I bring up Guns N' Roses quite a bit, even though 90% of my guests are country artists. And I usually relate it to Guns N' Roses because, I've gotten more music writing influence from Guns N' Roses than probably some of the country bands I follow. But for the listeners to know, Brando actually has a couple of funny stories he's told, like the Austin City Limits story last year when I guess girlfriend at the time was like, "Is that Duff?" You were talking about when she spotted Duff on stage, and it's just kind of cool things. But you mentioned Dave Matthews Band too, that she's a big Dave Matthews Band fan, and so one thing I've wondered is there a band you've discovered together, and because you both got into them at the same time, it's your band, or is there another band that you were both diehard fans of already that's kind of like your middle ground band?
So I think one of the bands that we first bonded over before we kind of really understood each of our obsession, although I think up front it said it in my Bumble profile, Guns N' Roses podcast host, because I thought that was kind of an intriguing trait. I had some other stuff in there which I don't remember, but so the people knew my love of GNR right off the bat, but it's just getting to know her, just talking about the Beatles, it just kind of came up naturally for both of us because we were both fans. And our parents were fans, and we were. When you first date, you're kind of driving a lot of places because you're not living together yet. So I would, and here's the thing, Garrett. I listen to Guns N' Roses every day, sure, or mostly every day, but I just like listening to the entire playlist of like this my music, like I used to do with I don't know if I'm selling myself here, outing myself rather, with the Napster days of the LimeWires, or just legally with the iTunes. I just like making my own master list of everything that I like. And if I want to deviate to whatever, so be it. And the Beatles would come up often, and she's like, "Are you putting that on there for me?" No, I really like the Beatles. So the Beatles, yeah. And she knew, Guns N' Roses, and that's kind of why I started, not just because they're my quote-unquote favorite band. Not that I'm a fanboy-ish, but I'm kind of all a realist at the same time. But people know who Guns N' Roses are. They don't have to be a diehard like you or I, but they know who Axl or Slash is. They've heard of Sweet Child of Mine. It's the very basic.
Yeah,
I talk about that. So she knew the very basic. So when we went to Austin City Limits, we're watching it, and she's like, "Who is that?" I'm like, "That's Duffy Kagan." He's hot. I'm like, "Yeah, well, you should see his wife."
Yeah.
They're both hot. They're both hot people. And so yeah, I learned of her love of. It's kind of ironic. So we have, like I guess like most people do with friends or significant others, whatever. Some things in common, some things not. But Dave Matthews was always on my bands I really don't like list. Not that I keep a list, but the mental list. It's. I try not to be that guy or that person that just hates bands. I like Creed. Nickelback is fine, but I don't like Dave Matthews. So I always kind of avoided it. Now I can't, and especially so now with lack of concerts. What is there to do? You being a musician, it's very difficult. So a lot of musicians, famous or not, did web streams, live streams, or concert streams, or whatever. So Dave Matthews would do one every Wednesday, or almost every Wednesday. And since my girlfriend, fiance, whatever, is a dance teacher, she couldn't just watch it like on her laptop somewhere. I mean, mind you, it's like almost the same. They changed up the set list, yeah, but it's not like they're doing pyro. It's just. I respect them, but it's not like, I don't know. I've seen enough Dave Matthews for my life.
Yeah.
I respect I respect all of them, and talent-wise, it's just not for me. But since she's a dancer, she needs to take up the entire living space and just dance for like 2-3 hours, whatever. Like every Wednesday, and I'm just sitting here. There are a lot of times I would sit and watch with her, being a good guy. But after a while, it's the same, like I said, the same show over and over again. So I just be in my little, what is now a little radio corner home, since we've been mostly working. I'm mostly working at home since the pandemic. I go into the studio in New York City a few times for certain shows. But I'll just have my headset on or do work or watch a very graphic horror movie, something that she would not be interested in. But so yeah, and then just talking about that amongst the GNR themed thing that I do, people seem to think that it's funny. So I don't know. I because they just picture me kind of suffering, but kind of being grinning and bearing it at the same time. But yeah,
it's kind of funny how
me,
that works. Like my wife, back when The Dirt came out on Netflix, I really wanted to watch it. I was like, you got to watch this movie with me. It's Motley Crue. She's like, I don't think so. I think I'm going to pay. I'm like, come on. She's like, tell you what, I'll watch The Dirt with you if you watch the Jonas Brothers documentary with me. I was like, yeah, all right, cool.
Wow.
I was very pleasantly surprised. For someone that knows zero about the Jonas Brothers other than their brothers, I was like, oh man, they're really scooping out some dirt on each other in this documentary. I was like, this is kind of cool. Then we watched The Dirt, and she was not as intrigued with that movie. But
it's funny. I did the same thing with her with The Dirt. At first, she was like, no, because she just thought it was a documentary about Motley Crue. I'm like, no. I mean, like, yeah, I'm like, I would want to watch it. I know you wouldn't, but it's more of a story. And she kind of liked it. But yeah, now her thing is maybe, which is now your speed, and perhaps you've seen it. She's binge watching Nashville. So so now I am watching Nashville through osmosis or whatever you want to call it, because she just has it on all the time. So now I'm getting the country kick every day. So I don't know. There's something sitcom-y, if that's a word, about the Dave Matthews thing and now the country thing. I don't know. That's just me the way I see it, as a terrible comedian would say.
Well, before I jump into some more of your career, I do want to say, you mentioned country and the different areas, and when y'all went to ACL, I do have to ask, when you were down here in Texas, did you get a chance to go to Buc-ee's or Whataburger? Because those are kind of staples for a road trip down here.
I don't think so. I forgot to ask her what barbecue place that we went to, but definitely not Whataburger.
Yeah,
and the other one doesn't sound familiar. There were kind of places around the event where that we kind of just found, and it was great. I'll have to get back to you on that. I forgot to research. I forgot what barbecue place we went to.
Well, you probably would have had to get out of Austin a little bit, because those are more of like road trip staples than actually being in Austin, because Austin has so much unique stuff to it on its own that, it's just, there's a million different places you can go eat and do things. But I do remember, I didn't get to go that weekend, but I do remember that the weather was a lot colder than it was supposed to be. And I was like, man, anybody that came to Texas that week kind of got a misleading picture for our weather, but it looked like the concerts were really good. Yeah,
it was definitely misleading. I'm glad I packed a couple of sweatshirts, because it was a lot of just basketball jerseys and just, Guns N' Roses cut-off shirts or whatever. But yeah, but I was told that the previous week was too hot, so I don't know. I don't know if I got lesser of the two evils. The one thing I do regret, maybe it was the bats, rather. I didn't get the chance to see the bats. I forgot what we had to decide between. That cave where the bats come out every night at like 9 p.m. or something like that. Have you ever done that?
I've never gotten to go when it's happening. I've been to that exact spot a million times, but never when the bats are coming out.
All right, because I'm assuming we're going to go at some point in our lives again, when things eventually calm down, because it's a great place, and there are a lot of things that we could have done there, but we didn't, because we just spent all day at the festival. But it was so cool. I got my first kind of country concert with Casey Musgraves.
Oh
right?
Yeah,
or in person. I've listened to plenty of country broadcasts, so I've listened to plenty of country music, but I've never actually. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. No, I don't think so. That might have been, like, if you want to call it that, my first country show experience.
That's pretty cool.
Cool.
And it's unique down here too, because Texas kind of, a lot of people don't realize this, but we have our own country music scene, because Nashville has become so pop oriented, and to where it's kind of hard to determine the difference between pop and modern mainstream country, that, over the past 15 to 20 years, Texas country has kind of become its own thing. And so now Casey Musgrave, she's pretty country. She's Nashville, but she's still very country. But there's definitely, you can catch some unique shows down here, and that's something I've always loved about it.
I will say, on that massive playlist I was telling you that I keep the Beatles, and by the way, GNR is the only band that I have like every song you can get, even though they don't have the biggest catalog. But still, they're like the only band that I have like that does. You know what I mean? Not some like loophole. Oh, this band has one album.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. But I have Hank 3 on there. I have plenty of Hank 3.
Oh,
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like him.
He's different.
He is different. So I like the different. I know country. I know it's kind of like metal or rock, where all these subgenres kind of fight over each other and what's real, what's hardcore. It's an interesting conversation to have. I've noticed country in every place is being more rock and roll, or trying to be.
Well, it's kind of how what I'll do is I've redone all of my music, and it should be coming out here in the next couple of weeks. I'll send you a link. I'll send it to you so you can download it. I don't make people buy my music. I'll send it to you, and it's definitely the rock side of country for sure. But
right on.
Yeah. So take us to the pre-Brando days, because you mentioned that you have a radio job, you have this other job, you don't just do the podcast all day, of course. So take us all the way back to the beginning, because usually I'll talk to musicians and they'll say, well, I first sang in church when I was 3 years old. You don't have to go back to 3 if you don't want, but as far as you want, just tell us about life in New York and what got you into radio and everything like that.
Well, certainly no church, because Weisler, I don't know if you could tell, I'm a Long Island Jewish person. Well, my family's from Brooklyn, but I'm not going to go that overly too
I should tell my listeners real quick. Brando likes to call his podcast a Guns N' Roses themed bar mitzvah of a podcast, and I think that was the most hilarious way to describe a podcast.
Yeah, like a bar mitzvah party of a podcast. Because I don't know how many bar mitzvahs you've gone to. It's not like I've been to one recently, but they have themes. It's like a common thing. They'll have parties across the board. If it's my Sweet 16 or whatever, if it's birthdays, you can do it. But bar mitzvah parties always have a theme. So I'm like, okay, Guns N' Roses is my theme. I have a very, it's not like I'm reading from the Torah during my podcast, but I have a very Seinfeldy, Larry David, Jon Stewarty kind of sense of humor, if you want to label it. So that's I don't know. So I'm trying to come up with a creative way of calling my podcast like different. I guess that's the radio in me, where it's like a tagline. It's appetite for distortion. Looking at life through guns and rose-colored glasses. Or I just try to be creative with it. So if you want not to go back too far, where that kind of started is maybe my love of sports. Not that I was never good at it. But just I loved watching it, collecting cards. I loved the broadcasts on TV, and stayed up late nights listening to the radio and sports radio. Especially sports radio. I used to fall asleep. I couldn't fall asleep without listening to sports radio, sports talk.
Oh wow!
And that was when I was like 13, 14 years old. And I think that's what I wanted to do initially when I went to college. I went to Hofstra University on Long Island, or in Long Island, depending upon where you're from. I guess I grew up on Long Island. I say on. That's the whole thing. Like I said, I can't help it. It is what it is. So I have to call attention to what the show is, in addition to the GNR part. But when I got to, I wrote for like the school newspaper a little bit, just like sports stuff. When I got to college, I think I was going to go. I did go the journalism route. Broadcast journalism was my major, whatever, however you want to phrase it. See, clearly, a lot of that that knowledge has left me since I've graduated, because I don't know the correct AP style of which to put things in. So I met this person, this random kid, during orientation for college, who was just going around like he was by himself. Didn't go up with his family. I came up with my family. It was like a family weekend or whatever. And he saw me sitting on a bench, and he just started talking to me, making friends. And he's like, I just signed up for the radio station, and like a light bulb went off. I'm like, that sounds cool. So I signed up for the radio station, and Hofstra since then, because I think that was like 2001. If you want to do the math there. So that was 2001. Since then, like Hofstra, I think this year has won like awards for the best college radio station and non-commercial radio station, and they've been like even improved since I've been there. And there had to be rigmarole and use that. I don't know if I've used that word in a while. To get in there, like you had to go through like interviews, you had to go through like tests of using the radio board properly, and you had to be approved to be on the air with demo tapes. Because a lot of colleges would just let you which is good, just let you have the experience. As long as you're not cursing or doing anything bad or breaking anything, have fun. But this was like very structured from right out of the gate with me in my radio career. So that really shaped me. And I knew, just like in sports, because again, my love of sports, I guess even before then, I should say, I wanted all this. I wasn't going to do. I was like thinking about doing the sports route, like sports radio. But there was something like I had an opportunity to do a radio show it was called The Aggressive Edge. It was just like the station heavy metal show, and I wasn't like super into. I like heavy metal, but I'm not into like super like death metal or super screamy vocals. I mean, some of it's fine. But the rock show was completely taken that I could play Guns N' Roses because they were already my favorite band. But I'm like, on this heavy metal show, I can play Metallica, I can play AC/DC, I can play these bands. And it was every Thursday night from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And to come up with a radio name, I didn't want to be Brandon Weisler, Jewish kid from Long Island. That's not cool. Everyone has if you're going to be in radio, that's the point of it. You're going to have a cool name. So I remembered from high school, this friend of mine, a loose acquaintance, said to me that I had never been called Brando before. I'm Brandon. I introduced myself as Brandon, still to this day. I'm not Axl. I'm not Cher. I'm not Bono. That's just not my personality. But again, I want on the radio, it's to sound cool. That's part of the whole shtick, I guess. So this kid came up to me. He's like, Brando, that rhymes with commando. And he just walked away. And that just stuck with me for whatever. So in college, I'm like, you know what? Brando the Commando sounds cool. That sounds heavy metal. And that's what I did for, throughout, college. I was Brando the Commando every Thursday from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And it was my first real interaction with callers overnight because it was the only place in the radio where you can get heavy music. It was my chance to get my outlet for my terrible, jokes. It was fun. My family would listen to me. My friends would listen to me because you were able to get them on the dial. It was just a really fun outlet. Being behind the mic, I had definitely a terrible fear of public speaking to get over. I remember the first time I was on the air, I was shaking. And that's something that took many years. Even now, I'm still weird about it, but I'm comfortable enough. The weirdness I accept. That's where I'm at now. But I was very nervous, but I wanted to do it. It just was very fun. It was something about being in a radio studio that was just, wow, this is great. And then after, go ahead, you were going to say something. You just cut me off. I'm so used to my podcast where I'm not aware of the time, where I'm aware of everything. So if you need to, shift me or whatever you need to do.
Well, I was going to throw in there. You mentioned Guns N' Roses is your favorite band before you started doing like the rock stations, everything. When did they become your favorite band? Like, at what point did you get hooked on their music? Because for me, like I was probably in college by the time I became a fan. I mean, I was like a casual fan who knew, the big three songs and all that around late college. But it wasn't until really when I was graduating my senior year, I got into like the entire catalog and became obsessed. Like what did it for you?
Well, I think at the beginning, I always loved them because growing up, I listened to so much classic rock radio, and it's just crazy to think of, I'm not going to completely bore you to where I left off college. So it's ridiculous, Garrett. All the steps and things I had to do to get where I am now, which is still not, again, I'm not Howard Stern. But listen, because I'm currently, one of the things that I do at iHeart is I'm one of the backup producers for the morning show at Q1043 in New York City, and that's classic rock radio. It's where like my dad would put on in the car, and I grew up listening to, and Guns N' Roses was on that. And I remember, I guess it was high school, a couple of friends I was specifically hanging out with that would listen to a ton of GNR, a ton of Metallica, and I remember asking them what Guns N' Roses album should I get? Because I finally got a CD player. I had upgraded from cassettes. On cassettes, I had Green Day, Dookie, and Aerosmith, Get a Grip, but I was still like finding myself because I still would have like the Ace of Base single of the Stein or Heavy D and the Boys. Like I really wasn't into super music then. So hanging out with, I guess, my friends Mike and Greg during high school, they really helped, push me in that direction. And it was, of course, suggested was start with Appetite, and then they were still, again, a loose. Like I liked them. I always loved them. And then I don't know, maybe it was in college. It was in college. Sophomore year, I started dating this girl that she was like, I love hair metal. I love 80s metal. She was almost embarrassed by it. But I'm like, no, I like this stuff too. I don't think I know how much I like it, but I want to learn, teach me more about it. Even though we were kind of the same age, she was just more into it. And she sat me down and we watched Welcome to the Videos, where they have every single one of the Guns N' Roses videos. And by that point, I already had been obsessed with November Rain, and I had seen the big ones. But I had never seen Garden of Eden before. It was just that simple fisheye lens video of them rocking out. And for whatever reason, that still sticks to me to this day, the first time I watched it. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, that's the same band that does November Rain. They're so badass in my head. And at that time, that was, probably, I tie this into my podcast as well. I don't know I forget your syllabus that you sent me, where we're going down with this, but it ties into like why I really connected then with GNR, because it was around that age, early 20s, where I was like, I'm depressed, but I don't know I'm depressed. I'm like, I'm feeling things, but I don't know what I am. Like, I wasn't emo. I listened to like some emo bands, but they weren't like cool. Like, I don't know. I needed that edge, and I found that in GNR, and that was the time MTV and VH1 actually played all those countdown, top 100 rock songs of all time, top 100 metal artists of all time. I consumed that. And so much of that was GNR. And the more and more I learned, I loved it. Now, I remember printing out Slash's Snake Pit, the logo, like on my shitty printer in college. And just think about, 2002, 2003, the kind of printers we had. Just putting it on my wall, on my dorm, because you had to cover everything with band stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like from there. I think just from there. I mean, the girlfriend and I at that time didn't last very long, but my love of GNR did, which is just something kind of crazy considering that I'm doing a podcast about it. And you're interviewing me about it today.
Yeah, you kind of touched on this briefly a second ago, but I was kind of the same way, and like I've dealt with anxiety throughout life, and as a kid I had ADD and who knows what else. But, depression is something I didn't realize I had, especially right after college. And I thought it's like, oh, it's a taboo topic. It's like if you talk about it, everyone's going to make assumptions. And so you just don't want to really acknowledge it. But really what got me truly realizing that that's what I was dealing with was when Duff's book came out. And, I actually took on bass playing after reading his book, and I love playing bass to this day. But the whole physical exercise thing, learning how to really attack that, it not only did I relate to the music, but now it's like, okay, reading about what some of these guys went through, it's kind of important. Now, unfortunately, the whole looking like a triathlete model part didn't rub off on me, but
sure, the
rest of it did. And so, you've talked pretty openly on your podcast about mental health and having a disability, and it's one of those things where it's what gives you the confidence and positive outlook to be able to do that? Because I had an episode, it was my 33rd podcast episode. My guest mentioned that it's hard to talk about stuff like that, and that it's important that more people do. So what's your outlook on that? I
kind of force myself, to be honest with you, to be confident or positive about it, because it's not easy every day. I think that's what attracted me to GNR, and what makes, Axl Rose my favorite member. If I'm going to be a fan about it, your favorite Beatle, your favorite baseball player, your favorite cartoon character, your favorite Guns N' Roses member was Axl, and that's what was missing for me with the emo scene that I was feeling in college was his anger, his anger, and that mixed in with the deepness of his. I'm trying to think of a better word for it, of just the depth. Probably it's probably the better English of it. Just the depth of his lyrics with the anger. It's not just yell. He'll have songs where it's like, fuck you, literally.
Yeah.
But just you read the pain in other songs where in Estranged, in November Rain, it's different, and I connected with that a lot. And just over the course of living my life and realizing it, I needed to go to therapy privately, finally accepting it, because I didn't get it. When I was younger, I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why somebody could be that sad and not just stop. Because with somebody growing up with a disability, so for those who, I mean, I'm not assuming your listeners are my listeners, but I have a neurological condition called demyelinating peripheral neuropathy. Very sexy. So basically, it's something, no pain, by the way. So I always have to say that right away because people's minds go somewhere else. There's no pain, but there's something missing in the nerves, so the message doesn't fully get there from the brain, which means like the muscles aren't being used properly. So it's really equated with weakness in layman's terms. So it's a weakness kind of thing. So I do wear leg braces. I'm not wearing them now because I'm currently in my apartment and I can get around my apartment because I can, hold my balance on a wall or something like that. That's okay. But when I'm out and about wearing shoes and stuff, I have my leg braces and my cane on. And sometimes you can't help but laugh at. I learned to laugh at that because of the experiences I've had. I really had to bite the bullet to be I'm 37 now, but to be a young 30-year-old, whatever, to get a cane, like who does that? Because of the experiences I had, all I've had to do is laugh. I'm at Sirius XM there briefly, and I'm walking past a girl, and she's smiling at me. I'm like, oh, yeah. Then I realize she's looking at my cane. She's like, oh, I thought it was a pimp cane. I'm like, well, maybe like a little bit, but we were cool after. But it was kind of like an icebreaker. Or, again, also at Sirius XM, I was only there for a year at the Catholic channel, by the way. I had to do whatever I had to do to get, radio to get here. Again, my career is insane, and if I was famous, it would be interesting, but it's still crazy. This was when I was at the Catholic channel. I think I might have been working 4 part-time radio jobs at once. It took me 7 years to get a full-time radio job because I went the on-air route, and which is very, very, especially now, but it's difficult. There's a limited amount of jobs and whatever. It's a whole thing. So I'm there, and I realize, I've been in the business for years, but I'm happy to be at Sirius and around all these cool things. But I'm working, for the Catholic channel. It's kind of interesting, weird. It was an interesting, pleasurable. It was a good experience, but it's weird. I don't know what else to say. It's like a little Jewish kid working at. Again, I can tell you stories. Maybe I will, but I see the Foo Fighters. How about that for a right turn? In one of the what are called fishbowl studios, where you can see inside the glass and everything. You probably know that as a musician. So I can see the Foo Fighters there, and I'm like, damn it, man! Like I'm in there, doing like a broadcast with this very lovely pastor or whatever. But like the Foo Fighters are there. That's what I want in my life. I want to interview rock stars, and I see that on my way to the bathroom, and then I finish with the bathroom. I'm washing my hands, and then I see Taylor Hawkins come out of the stall in the corner of my eye. It's not like I'm staring, looking. It's the bathroom. As a guy or anyone, you look where you got to look in the bathroom. But I couldn't help my peripheral. There's Taylor Hawkins from the Foo Fighters. You noticed that. So whatever. I'm a little bit of a creep where I'm like washing my hands very slowly to time my exit to bump into him, kind of.
Yeah.
And this is what I have to cane. And I think it's kind of, again, a conversation piece at this time. Like I've gotten into like joking cane fights with old people at that time. Like I'm walking to this pizza place, this like 80-year-old guy's walking out. He's like, we're the same, on guard. So I had like moments like that. So I'm like, with Taylor, maybe there's I don't know. And I happen to be wearing, if you remember the Times Like These video from Foo Fighters.
Oh,
Dave Grohl, he's wearing a shirt of the band The Sounds. His shirt is red. I happen to buy the blue one. I just like it better.
Oh,
so
wow.
I happen to be wearing it that day. Just happen to. And I just go, Taylor's, as we're back, again, I time it because I'm a creep. He's like, oh, no, you go first. I'm like, no, you're Taylor Hawkins of the Foo Fighters. You go first. He's like, no, you're wearing the same shirt that Dave wore in the video. You go first. So it was kind of like, it was a funny icebreaker. So again, that's part of where the confidence came from. There was a lot I had to deal with in my private life as far as getting over it, not just on the air. But I just noticed on the air that I can't be anybody but myself. So making like stupid jokes sometimes, like really corny dad jokes, and falling on the after punchline of, I don't know, I have a chemical imbalance, that's why I say something so stupid. And over time getting reactions over that, I'm like, well, I'm talking about real things. Because I was going to therapy. I started going to therapy at the same time, like I really started my career. So they kind of went like hand in hand, and my therapist listens to me. She's kind of ever, I don't think at the beginning, man, I'm trying to think. Other than Cape Cod, but I came back from Cape Cod because I was there for a couple of years. Again, my career. I started seeing a therapist shortly after. So it's like that's tied into it. And now with this podcast that I've been doing, because that's on classic rock radio, and there's only so much, mental health talk you can do between, talking about Guns N' Roses and Led Zeppelin, the songs, the 30 seconds, 1 minute you have. Sometimes it would come up when I was involved with a morning show, because that was that kind of format. But with the GNR podcast, yeah, I love Guns N' Roses, but do I want to talk about them every single second for all these hours? It's not like they produce enough content for that to happen.
Yeah.
So just say from the beginning, just like of what you asked, like, why do you like this band, and digging deeper and stuff like that. So talking about Axl's, anger issues, talking about Duff's issues, Slash almost dying, Steven Adler almost dying. And it's just, I have all these guests that are talking about coming out of rehab and addiction. And for me as a person, and I think as an interviewer, it's good for me to talk about my issues because I connect with the guests. I'm honest with my audience. I think, people like you have reached out to me because of that. So it hasn't been easy. I did that. I did a Facebook Live. I think the big deal for me was doing like a Facebook Live shortly after like Chris Cornell's death or Chester Bennington's death. Because, it's what you have to talk about. Because I lost my dad in a similar fashion. And when you're on social media and you see people talk about Chris Cornell or Robin Williams or Chester Bennington, and it's like almost kind of reading about like your dad in a way.
Yeah.
And it's like all the misconceptions about mental health and depression. And it's like, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, am I going to sit back every year and when it's not, like, I got to say something. I'm a nobody, but it's like, I got to say something, even if it helps my family, seeing that kind of thing. Like, as an older brother, seeing younger brothers. And, I think it has. Some of them, I don't think my brothers would listen to this, no offense. So I think it's okay for me to say I've had a couple of brothers like say to me that was good to see that. It can be shocking at first, because it's a shocking thing to talk about, but it's real. And look how real it is. Look, it keeps happening to our heroes.
Yeah.
And every, whether you get a family member, we all have a family member that suffers depression, but if you look at pop culture, how many specifically die of suicide or rock?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's, or it's just, yeah. So I don't know. I've gotten a lot of encouragement from people like you who have helped me find the confidence talking about it, So I think that's helped. And of course, again, some stuff in like my personal life and getting confidence there, not realizing, I should say, accepting the importance of something and the importance of others, if that makes sense. Like reprioritizing your life kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then also, you talk about it like I did at All City Limits. It's I got to talk about it because I sat in the handicap seat, or I was socially distanced almost before anybody was socially distanced.
Well,
because nobody in the handicap section was socially distanced, but we were up on that platform that you see pictures of.
Oh yeah.
It's a similar thing. It would just be today less people in there. But they did that for us, so we wouldn't be sitting on the grass, or it would give us seats, or so we can see above people. So I talk about, because there are handicapped people that go to concerts. So I got to talk about it, right? Who's talking about it?
Oh yeah. Well, it's like you mentioned the Facebook Live thing, and it's like, it's hard to talk about. You may not know who's listening, but I mean, your podcast has a ton of listeners, and whether, things like the Facebook Live, you may only reach one person who needed to hear it in that moment, and you may never know that they needed it. But I mean, it's like, if you can reach one person that kind of needs to hear that, I mean, it's like you're helping that, and that has a chain effect. They'll help somebody else. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, because I've experienced that myself. I've had friends who just, before I even realized I needed therapy, when I was, and I was really upset, and friends who, I don't know, weren't necessarily even trying to help me or knew something was wrong, but happened to just say something or just listen to me or crack a joke that just changed my mood in that moment. And that moment is what matters. So, yeah, I've learned that. I appreciate, you reaching out, and, I'm not a Stern or a Rogan. I appreciate my awesome little fan base that seems to get larger and larger. It's cool that I'm the furthest person that you've spoken to, but it's amazing that with Guns N' Roses' fans all over the world. I'm not going to take credit for that. I'm not going to take credit for that. But when I have listeners on my podcast and wanting to talk to me and wanting to talk about my podcast and about GNR from Ireland or from Croatia or from Canada or from Portugal, from all these different places and countries, and seeing some of my interviews get transcribed in other languages is just incredible. Again, it's, I just have everything in perspective kind of thing. I never want to be like, because I've been hearing that, I hear that a lot, Garrett. So I always try to keep things in perspective. I can always get bigger and better and do better. So I have to kind of, I look at everything like Chinese democracy to tie it, to tie everything together. Like I can always, I know I got to release the beast every now and then. I got to let it go. But I have a little Chinese democracy quality in me where I'm like, I really want to rework this. This can be better. What can I do here? So
yeah. Don't leave it in Tom Zutaut's locker for years.
I know, right? So I've learned to do that. I used to do that a lot with radio demos where you would make like a 2-minute reel of yourself.
Oh yeah.
And I would always tweak it, and I'd be like, I'm Chinese democracying it. I just gotta let it go. Like I gotta be rock and roll. I can't be too perfect. But yeah.
Well, you mentioned your fan base, and I think they'll appreciate me asking this. And this is such an off the wall question. I never thought I'd ask a guest, but you mentioned Taylor Hawkins being in the bathroom at work. You've also mentioned that same kind of thing happened with Jim Breuer. So now I'm just kind of wondering, how many big names in the industry have you just randomly walked into the bathroom with?
a few, honestly. And none of them are like the George Michael kind of story. It's I think it's really due to, whether I'm serious or whether I'm serious, whether I was working at Sirius or any radio station, iHeart or some of these, smaller, rock stations or whatever. If you have people there to interview, I mean, there's bathrooms on the floor. And no, I am not a creep. I'm not following people into the bathroom. Like, I do like taking pictures. I do. But I know. So, for example, I have a picture with Ice Cube. I was leaving the bathroom and he had been walking in. I did not stop. I was like, that was Ice Cube. I was not going to go back into the bathroom. I just said to the receptionist who knew Ice Cube in a way, I'm like, before he leaves, because he had a pass her when he would eventually leave the bathroom, would you mind introducing me? She's like, no problem. So that's how that happened. The Jim Breuer thing was that serious, and it was like just late on a Friday, and a lot of the studios are on one floor. It's just like one of those bathrooms with a ton of urinals. I don't know. It is what it is. And I'm at one, and again, it's the peripheral. I don't know. I'm not like if you remember that scene in Ace Ventura, I'm not that guy.
Oh yeah.
So I see Jim Breuer, and maybe I was like, sometimes I do have that little tick, like that. Maybe it's it's better that my tick is to say something what I think is silly rather than the Axl Rose jump off the stage back in the day kind of thing. But I usually have to say something silly. So I don't know, because we're two dudes and the bathroom was empty. It's like late on a Friday, and I just go pee next to Jim Breuer. this is the highlight of my career. And he just goes, and he just starts, like in his goat boy laugh.
Yeah.
And then years later, I would interview the guy like twice, like once in studio for an hour. So it goes to show you how quickly life can change.
Yeah.
I was at Sirius, kind of, happy with that I was in radio and where I was, but still dreaming of greener pastures and making a joke about, with Jim Brewer at a urinal. And then a few years later, I'm interviewing him for an hour in studio about, Axel DC.
Yeah.
So it was, so it was cool. I don't even remember what your original question was about this, by the way.
Oh, no, that was it. Just who you've run into. But
oh, yeah, the bathroom. But I will say, there's one more, though, one bathroom, because I want to give him a shout out.
Yeah.
It was the late and great Patrice O'Neill.
Oh.
I can't say what he said because I'll get canceled. And you got to imagine if you know Patrice, you know his language. But he was talking with Opie from the then Opie and Anthony show, and I was just in the stall doing what I got to do, and then I hear them over talking, and they're talking about TV roles about Patrice was getting offered, or maybe he was in The Office at the time. It's like, man, they keep offering me these, insert bad word roles. And I'm trying not to laugh in the stall and come out like a weirdo. So that was a weird special moment with Patrice. Sorry, I just love Patrice O'Neill, and if anyone gets that's all. I just wanted to mention that. I had to mention all my bathroom stories. Maybe there are more. I'll think about it.
That's hilarious. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah.
You also mentioned sports. So before I move on to like the AFD podcast and how you and Scotto put that together, I do want to mention you're a big Hurricane, or not a Hurricanes fan. I'm a Hurricanes fan. You're an Islanders fan. So how long have you been an Islanders fan? Because I know you've been into sports since a young age.
That's probably since birth. Honestly.
Oh, okay.
I see pictures of myself where I don't remember, and I see Islander stuff, that I'm wearing or it's on the wall. My dad I guess his family was a Rangers fan, but when he was young, the Islanders were new, and he wasn't that big of a hockey fan. But the Islanders were he's like, oh, this is new. Let me get into it. And then, they, 10 years later, they have a dynasty. So that's what and I was born. So the last time they won a cup was when I was born. That's, of course, the way it goes. But yeah, so since birth, basically, I still love sports, but the music thing is, I don't know. I think I want to get more athletes on. I think that's kind of I want to get that crossover going with Appetite for Distortion. I want to. There was one recommendation that I haven't heard back yet, but it was. It wasn't that long ago, so it's not like a thing yet. But who was it? Maybe you said it last episode, but it was Fred Corey from Cinderella.
Oh yeah,
he works for the LA Kings, doing like sound for them and stuff in the arena. And I asked him about it since he works for the LA Kings, and he also does stuff for the Trailblazers with their sound. So I said, if you know anybody who any hockey player or whatever that likes Guns N' Roses, let me know. He's like, get Luke Robitaille on the show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll get Luke Robitaille. So, I mean, I hope that happens. I've tried to get wrestlers on the show. I love wrestling. I mean, I like more of the old school than today is, I don't know. It's oversaturated for me today. It's too much of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I like a lot of the typical, like, what you would call the typical, boy stuff from, if you're a boy from the 80s, early 90s. Pretty cliche.
That's awesome. And I mean, it's like growing up in the 90s, there's definitely like a checklist of things you had to be into. But, I told my wife this past year, it was just over a year ago, I was like, we need to go watch a Carolina Hurricanes game in Raleigh, make the road trip from Texas while Sebastian Aho and Justin Williams are still on the same team. And of course, Justin Williams retired because of COVID. We never got to go see that. But I was like, I think about what you say with GNR and like the Yankees. It's like, no matter who's in the lineup, you still love the team. So I'm like, yeah, we didn't get to see Williams, but hopefully we can go see the Hurricanes sometime in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's not just the music or it's not just the team. You become a fan of the players or if you want to look for those parallels. I think Dee Snider, he called my analogy stupid, but we got to. I didn't argue with him. I think next time if I talk to him again, I'll argue it because I think it is good. Because this was when the Yankees got Tino Martinez, I became such a huge Tino Martinez fan. And when he left to go to the Cardinals, I had an opportunity to go to a Cardinals game in St. Louis, and it was great to see Tino there. So I was kind of became like a Cardinals fan, or even though I'm an Islanders fan, I fell in love with the Avalanche when they moved from Quebec for whatever reason. So you can find like teams or bands that you love for whatever reason. If they bring you joy, you know, you can follow players. You know, sometimes people overthink it. You know, the only thing that doesn't need to be overthought if you're the band and you're figuring out like royalty stuff. But as fans, you know, if it's music or it's just sports, just enjoy it.
I'm going to
enjoy what it is.
Cut that clip out and send it to the people that tell me I have too many teams that I follow. I can follow whoever I want.
You can follow a lot of teams, but you can't, like the rivals. Like, are you weird about?
Oh, no.
Like,
well, the only one I've been weird about was, you know, I have a master's degree from Texas A&M, but I worked for Texas Tech for a while. So people gave me grief about that. But I mean, other than that, no, I don't have any like conflicts of interest.
Okay, because that's the only one. Because I'm not huge into college sports, but from what I know of Texas, that sounds like that could be a big deal.
Yeah.
But like I can never be an Islanders and a Rangers fan. Right. As a Yankee fan, I find myself kind of rooting for the Mets after all these years because I have so many Met fan friends. But if my Met fan friends would never root for the Yankees because you know the dynamics. It's like you root for the. So that's kind of how it is. But with GNR, I don't know because I never thought they would get back to whatever they are. So at least Axl and Flash would ever talk again. So what was available to me when they finally toured was with Buckethead, and I liked it and I got into it. And I never, at first, like maybe Chinese Democracy, it took some like adjusting because you're listening to Use Your Illusions for so long and Lies, and like this is just so different, but you like it. And now I'm happy Slash is back, but I still like Tommy Stinson, I still like Buckethead, I still like these people.
Oh yeah.
So what? Like I can't be a fan of somebody because they're not in Guns N' Roses anymore, or I can't be a fan of somebody if they're not like an Islander anymore. I still Kyle Alposo is on the Sabres. So hope Kyle does well. I don't know. That's my random example because I'm watching the Islanders right now.
Well, that's a perfect segue, actually. So I started listening to your podcast. It may not have even been the third episode yet. I mean, it was brand new, and I don't know if it was the GNR forum or what it was that led me to it. But anyone who's a diehard Guns N' Roses fans knows that there's just long periods of nothing. And I became a diehard fan around 2009, 2008. So I kind of binge listened to the band, and then I Wikipedia'd them to be like, all right, who all was in it other than Axl and Slash? I started my path to being a total nerd, and that's when I was like, oh, they actually have a new album last year, and I listened to Chinese Democracy. I was like, it was all right. It grew on me. I love that album now, but at the time I was like, yeah, I don't know. But then I was disappointed. I'm like, oh, these guys don't get along anymore. So from around 2008 till 2016, there just wasn't a whole lot to follow other than when Duff reunited with Axl. So I started listening to the podcast with you and Scotto, and they started talking about the reunion rumors and everything. And I'd been following the rumors up to that point. And so really that was kind of the perfect time to kind of tune into something new and follow it as the podcast developed. So what led to you and Scotto putting this together?
Very weird because while I mentioned, and again, this was only a year of my career where I was at Sirius and I was so low level, like it's nothing, but I have to bring it into the story. Scotto was also working there. However, I did not meet him there. We had a common friend that we went, who also worked there, to go see Guns N' Roses at Roseland Ballroom. And this was the Guns N' Roses when I believe DJ Ashba joined the band. And I was cool with that because I really dug the first 6 a.m. record.
Oh, yeah.
And I was excited. I was excited for that. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought it was a little weird, and I still do with the hat. Like, why did he also need to have a top hat? Like, and I say that as like somebody who's a fan of his, and he gets way too much hate. But I think there's some sort of self-awareness. Yeah. I don't know. I just think you're either the band or that band, that version of the band, or you're not. Mm-hmm. That's another story to it we've covered early on. But with Scotto, I mean, after that, we become Facebook friends. You exchange, because he was also from Long Island, you exchange numbers. Like, if you ever want to meet up at a show, and he just texted me one day, he's like, we should do a Guns N' Roses podcast. And I was at work at iHeart, editing something. I'm like, that's stupid. Like, yeah, they're my favorite band, but what am I going to be like? Oh, well, I really like November Rain. Slash is really cool. Like, what am I going to do? He's like, no, I'm telling you, because at the time, and he's doing a different one now, but he was working on a special operations podcast with somebody who used to be a sniper, I believe, Brandon Webb, who sold books and all these things. So, but Ian Scotto was making money off it. Like, they were able to sell to advertisers and stuff like that. So it was not just like a pipe dream, I thought. And I was like, okay. So, and he really stressed the importance on getting guests. I'm like, well, we're not anyone famous. I mean, we'll do our best. But by the third, he was getting creative. I was getting creative. I was really skeptical, honestly, of the podcast industry, or not. I don't know what to say industry, but just of the world coming from radio. I'm like, what is this? These are people who, and I'm being honest. I obviously my opinion has changed, but like podcast is for people who can get into radio. I've had to work overnights. It took me 7 years to get full time on an FM station, and nowadays you can just press record. So I would be lying to you if I wasn't kind of old man about it. But it really introduced me. It helped me. For one, as somebody who wasn't at that time full time on air, I was a part time. It helped me keep up my chops and let's see what this venture is. But like the third episode, though, we're interviewing Anthony Boza, who co-wrote Slash's autobiography. No one famous, but you feel it gives you cred. And then I see the power of 2 interviews and why I continued to do it, or maybe 3 interviews since in the early days. Was like episode 10, we were able to book Charlie Benanti from Anthrax just through Twitter. Like Ian, who listens to a ton of podcasts, I don't. I listen to sport. It's funny. I only listen to mine to edit. No offense. It's true. It's just because I've been radio my entire life. My other job I told you about. It's like I hear people talk all the time. I think maybe I'll listen to some things on occasion, but for the most part, it's either sports radio is different, and then or my music. But Ian listens to so many different podcasts, so he catches things that I would never catch. He's like, Charlie Benanti was just on Jimmy Josh's podcast. They were talking about Guns N' Roses. We should try to get them on the show. Yeah, okay. So he tweets them. She tweets them. Charlie responds. And then we get Charlie. And then this was before Charlie and Carla Harvey from the Butcher Babies were public.
Yeah.
But at the time, he's like, you should get Carla on. He's like, she likes GNR too. So then we get Carla Harvey on. So it kind of slowly but surely snowballed. And then by episode 20, I was able to get Dave Kushner just through Twitter, blown away by it. And from that, I had never had any experience with being picked up by a news outlet before, but this news outlet, alternativenation.net, transcribed my interview and put a link to my interview to it. And they see they have hundreds of thousands of followers, and or thousands of followers, whatever it is now. But it was just kind of like amazing. Like, wow, someone's paying attention. And then since then, other sites started picking up other interviews we would do later, whether it's Blabbermouth or Ultimate Classic Rock, and it's like, whoa, like people are paying attention. And so that was always a great feeling that I wasn't just talking to like the same 10 Guns N' Roses fans. There was a moment where, again, I started trying to get creative and interviewing fans on the show. I'm going to get an Axl Rose interview. So I try to get creative, and I can't believe I'm like 250 as we're recording this, 252 episodes into it.
Wow.
And but I'm like, how many GNR related guests can I get? And I can obviously get a lot. Sometimes I stretch the 6 degrees of GNR bacon, as I call it, but sometimes it just fits. It just works. So when it fits that it works with fan stories, because people have cool stories. Just because you're not famous doesn't mean you have a cool story.
I'll tell my audience real quick. I think my favorite one that you've done on that note, I forget his name and I forgot where he's from. I think Croatia, if I remember correctly, but there's a guy who was in Desert Storm, I think, or he was somewhere overseas in a war-torn area, and Appetite was going on in their vehicle. That one just sticks out to me.
Sure. So yeah, that was the one where I was going to. So he was in Yugoslavia, Croatia, and he fought in the Yugoslavian war.
Oh, okay.
And as he's going over this minefield, this grenade field where he can die at any second. So he's sharing that story of listening to Appetite for Destruction in his cassette. And there's not that set a bar pretty high, but I noticed as a fan of radio, from just listening as a child, calling into sports stations when I'm 14 years old, first hearing myself on the air, first dealing with callers, hearing callers' excitement when they win stuff or hear their voice on the air, or just to get to talk to you. I want to be able to involve my listeners when I have a complete creative control. And I want to get, push the GNR thing as much as I can, but I'm not pushing it very far if I'm involving everybody who likes Guns N' Roses. So just, I don't know what else to say other than I know I can do radio with anybody. I can fill those awkward silences. So if people are brave enough to kind of share their story, I make them feel as comfortable as possible. It's all pre-recorded. There's no gotcha questions. Share whatever you want. You're a private citizen, but people share their, Guns N' Roses stories at a concert or, whatever. Again, if they're in a war, when they have stuff going on, they ranges from all over the place. And I get emails all the time, people wanting to like, hey, when are you going to do the next fan obsession? Which I name being a radio guy, I have segments like you would have segments of a show, a morning show. I keep it Guns N' Roses themed. So it's a bad obsession, like the song, fan obsession. With stupid sound bites like you do in radio. So I try to combine everything I've learned over the years and just my fandom of the band and just put it into this monstrosity, as Axl once called the Buckethead version of GNR. So I've just kind of put everything in this monstrosity that I call Appetite for Distortion now, and I'm glad people like you listen. Otherwise, I don't know. I'd be very bored right now.
I crack up at your sound bites. There's one you've only played once, and I actually started laughing out loud, and it was the when you had Russ TCB from my GNR forum on, and you did the "I'm sorry for Russ" soundbite.
Oh,
I laughed so hard at that, but it's just things like that. I feel like I've cultivated a pretty cool community around your podcast, because the GNR fan community is pretty unique, but sometimes it gets pretty contentious, and I think it has a more positive vibe than the forums do. You'll get an occasional comment I'll see on Facebook or something where somebody will be like, I don't like, Miles Kennedy's voice or something. And it's like, really, dude? But, for the most part, I feel like it's kind of a neat place where everyone kind of vibes the same way from what I can tell.
Yeah, that's important to me because I hate, and maybe why I would never want to be famous is because there are a lot of angry people out there who say mean things to people for whatever reason, to feel better about themselves, to feel the need to express themselves in that way, rather than why not just keep scrolling? Do you need to say something if you don't like something? Why is that necessary? Is it necessary to drink my own urine? Sorry, right. If you don't know the movie reference. If you don't know the movie reference, no, I don't drink my own pee. It's from Dodgeball, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So it's just why is it necessary? So I do my best because I don't. Yeah, there are people who get under my skin, and that's something I've learned where people call a station, and I've heard, sure, hey, WPDH, the station I used to work up in Poughkeepsie, New York, is this Brando? Yeah. Is this Brando? Yeah. You're an asshole. Just hang up. So I've gotten those before, and sometimes I deserve it, sometimes not. But I've learned, is that what I want to cultivate? Do I want to be the over the top, angry talking head? There's enough people like that. Plus, that bleeds into your real life. It's just, I don't want to be that. I have enough anger issues, commuting. I just don't want to put that out there. And seeing in the GNR community that it can get, I don't even want to say it's the GNR community. It's just people in general, no matter what fan base it is. Maybe I don't know. I asked my girlfriend, the Dave Matthews fan base, sometimes they can be argumentative. I don't think it's as much as GNR, but I just try to respond to people who perhaps say something negative in a positive way. Perhaps that's where I inject my therapeutic skills, or at least as being in therapy, what I've learned. And also my second job, I'm learning how to like write emails and how to do good customer service. So I've applied that, and just sometimes, even if I don't agree with somebody what they say, I try to leave it as positive as possible. Okay, I don't agree with your opinion, and just not leave it angry. I'll leave it up. I don't want to censor people. Unless it gets like nasty or negative or hate filled or something like that. It's like you don't need to do that. You can express your opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't have to agree with it. And saying you don't have to agree with mine either. I don't care. But then I just think that's kind of life. But I think that's what makes a band. So I have a very band approach to radio and to the podcast. So yeah, that's important to me. I want a smart audience. I want a nice audience. I know, because I see it. I see that I have really good listeners that I don't agree with, let's just say politically. But do I care? No. Believe whatever you want. Just behave when we're all in the pool. Just behave when we're all in the pool, then we're all cool. I'm not going to use that tagline again, but I guess it felt good in the moment.
Well, I do hope someday, somebody in GNR's management listens and realizes that about your podcast, because you take the opposite approach of so many media outlets, but it's just not a dirt throwing show. And I'll tell my listeners, you call it the 6 degrees of GNR Bacon, and it made me laugh the other day because you were talking to somebody who had Kevin Bacon in the background, and I'm like, dude, that's actually like 2 degrees away. But you could, those cop shows.
Linda Perry.
Yeah, that's who it was. I was blanking on the name. I was like, oh, who was it? Those cop shows where they have the big bulletin board and the yarn, and they're connecting the mob boss to this suspect, and then eventually there's like a web. I mean, you could cover a wall with the amount of guests you've had who connect one way or another. I mean, it would be fascinating to see a visual of just the amount of connections that have come from your podcast.
It's become interesting because, again, everybody, you have your own style, Gary. You're focusing on country. You have a lot of local stuff going on. You're first developing it, but everybody, I just don't want to do I have a podcast, and I just talk about anything and everything, and you can listen to it because it's me, and there's no rules. So I didn't want to just have at least a rock podcast. There's so many of them. Like, how do I separate myself? I don't consider myself that unique, that people are just going to come flocking to me. Yeah, there are redeeming qualities I've learned to accept about myself. But with the GNR thing, again, it's pushing the boundaries and creativeness. And at least I want people to get to a point where, like, we'll have a GNR thing, but just, I don't know. It's like listening to like a sports station, I guess. Like wherever you are, you're going to hear about the Cowboys. You'll hear about the Texans. You'll hear about the Dallas Stars or whatever. But you're also will hear about maybe the Yankees. Maybe you'll definitely hear about Tiger Woods. Perhaps you'll hear about who won the cricket tournament, whatever. That all ties in together.
Yeah.
But also you're hearing those hosts talk about their lives and maybe their kids going to Little League and stuff like that. So a lot of it is that kind of approach to it. So it's fun, and I definitely push it because there are people, conversations I want to have, and let's see how I tie it. I used to do this game by myself with The Simpsons. I'm like, name anything in the world, and I could tie it to maybe, I don't know if I could do it now, but I could tie it to a Simpsons episode, and that's kind of like the approach. Like, that's also part of the approach. But again, that's just me being a nerd and a geek in my life before any broadcast thing. I used to be like, The Simpsons is like, it's a Bible. I could tie anything to it. So now with GNR, whether it's like getting Tom Green, the comedian, to come on because he saw Guns N' Roses once with Bubbles from the Trailer Park Boys.
Oh yeah,
just to get him on there, just to talk about it, or to get let's see another good one, like even Penelope Spheris, who directed Wayne's World, but she also directed Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. And to find out that it was supposed to be Guns N' Roses to close the show, not Megadeth. So it's like all these little things. But yeah, I want to talk to her about Wayne's World too. Or like, if you listen to the new episodes, I really like talking to Lisa Maxwell, who was the saxophone player for Use Your Illusion, that tour. But I love talking to her about Animaniacs.
By the way, she sounded like a lot of fun. Like, that was just a fun interview to listen to.
Yeah, she was really cool. I wish I did it sooner, but she'll be on again because there's certainly more stories to talk about. And yeah, you meet these people, connect these people who, something I realized, like, hey, you should interview this person. Like it's like a new networking kind of thing. And it's nice to have that like constant of not just me, that it's also Guns N' Roses, of just knowing that I have an umbrella to fall on. It's not like I'm starting from scratch every show.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, what do I need to do to make this GNR-y,
Well, my second favorite band is Scorpions, and my third and fourth are probably Motley Crue, AC/DC. Then it goes down into ZZ Top and Skinner. But I mean, you've kind of connected a few of those dots, whether it's through Axl DC or anything like that. And I think you had one of the Scorpions a while back, I believe. Was it Matthias?
Yeah, Matthias, yeah.
I remember that one. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like it's branching into like the Venn diagram of bands I follow is now merging on the podcast. But I had this written for later, but my curiosity is peaked now. Everyone seems to.
I think, yeah, there you are.
Oh,
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I just heard a beep and I was like, oops. Well, I had this written for later, but my curiosity on it is going with the networking thing is, everyone in the GNR world seems to have a publicist or a line of contact and all that kind of stuff. But, Izzy Stradlin is kind of like Obi-Wan after Revenge of the Sith. He's like out in the desert in his own little world. God bless him. But like, have you tried going through the steps of what it would take to contact him? Or is that kind of like a,
sure,
why bother?
No, sure. There's never, the only why bother has been Axl, honestly. I think even Slash have been, not to say why bother. I think the Slash opportunity, I know people who know Slash. It's just the opportunity hasn't really, if it does come up, hasn't. Duff, unfortunately, did not work out, even though I've interviewed his wife a few times for her book. Axl really has been the why bother. But, no, with Izzy, you find out with meeting these like minor characters, I don't want to say minor characters, let's just say sub-characters, that know Izzy. Like that still kind of talk to him or spoke to him kind of the last few years, and they all know, and that's something that you want to pay respect to, and it's also how when people talk to me when they find out you're on radio, and especially when concerts were going on, you had to respect people's boundaries, I guess.
Yeah. That
you got to know when it's appropriate to ask, like people like with radio, like, oh, can I concert tickets? Can I have a free T-shirt? Whatever. You got to know when that's appropriate. One time I was asked that in like a drive-through at the Wendy's. Like, yeah, I have like fucking radio T-shirts in my passenger seat. Get out of here. So I know people who are friends with Slash or like Mike Squires, who did the theme for my theme song from Loaded, obviously is friends with Duff. And obviously knows I want to interview him, but what am I going to do? It'd be a crazy song and just like make it happen. So with Izzy, I don't think he's aware of me, but I know people who know him, and if it works out one day, obviously I'll be famous then, I guess. but yeah, it's just the GNR thing that's again, we'll do this if we do another podcast. When we do another podcast, it's just the GNR world is very weird. Mm-hmm. And you also, in asking people, it's like, yeah, do I really want to ask Izzy to do this? Like, is that what I want to do with my friendship? So, I mean, if it comes up, it comes up. It's just nothing I've pushed that hard for, but yeah, I'm sure dip my toe into it.
Well, I always think about that, and I think back to when Eddie Trunk interviewed Steven Adler a year or two ago. I forgot when it was, and I remember at one point Adler had said that he'd lost contact with Izzy for a while, but when Eddie Trunk interviewed him, this was after Steven had played with GNR a few times. It was like after he wasn't coming back for guest spots, so it was probably about 2 years ago. And I remember Eddie Trunk said, I'd love to interview Izzy Stradlin sometime, and Adler said, well, he said, I'll put in a good word. I'll text him right after this, but don't get your hopes up. So it's like, well, I don't know. There's probably a long line there, but you've interviewed everybody from, Alice Cooper to Dave Mustaine, and you've had a lot of high notes. Like, what have been some of your, like, wow, I can't believe this just happened, high notes for the podcast? Other than being invited to the Garrett Smith podcast, of course. Of course, naturally. I mean, that goes without saying. I'm very fortunate to have kind of combined this,
it's kind of just a creative passion project. This podcast that's that my former co-host, still current friend Scotto, came up with. Where I'm doing the podcast on my own. We both happened to be working at a radio station. We weren't doing this through our respective companies, but we had access, or at least I had access to a radio studios. And you do the right thing. Again, it's boundaries. Like, hey, when I'm not working, can I use the studio for this? Yes. And over time, I proved myself with over time, and it's doing it all myself. I'm actually getting recognized by news outlets. So now I'm getting it to a point where I'm getting it on the iHeartRadio and app, and so I'm getting it on the Q1043 website. So they're tying it into me, where it's still my thing, but I've kind of created a hybrid with my career. So one of the things that we do, or at least I do, and we do, I should say that with Premier Networks, is if you listen to morning radio, I guess let's use that as an example, and you hear whether it's a rocker or an author or an actor being interviewed, it's not their first of the day. It's usually they usually have a 2-hour window to do 15 interviews. So they're doing it in a row. And they're not doing it in person. I mean, sometimes they do it in person, but it's like they're doing it how we're doing it right now. But it's my job to connect the guest to the radio station, kind of like an old school operator kind of way. So that goes on. So there are certain people, since we're iHeartRadio Premier, that we get cool people that are promoting big things, that sometimes I have an opportunity to be a part of that it ties in. So I get opportunities that, I'm very fortunate to get with, a Dave Mustaine. I can't believe that's happening. Alice Cooper, I can't believe that's happening. Just with the GNR world, it's been kind of a dream just to talk to Matt Sorum or Gilby Clark. It's very cool to become friendly with the former managers who have said very kind things to me in private. That has been special. It's silly accomplishments like Pauly Shore. I've always wanted to interview Pauly Shore. That was so fun.
That was a fun episode.
So a lot of just different, or the fact that I got to interview both living members of the Doors. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I feel like I don't even deserve that. So it's things like that I've tied into this GNR world has just been very special. Just very special. I mentioned how I like Creed. Interviewing Scott Stapp was a huge deal for me.
Which, honestly, by the way, you hit on that a second. Creed, Nickelback, and DJ Ash, but they're in this category of why is everybody hating on them? They're all great. I don't listen to Nickelback, but when they come on my playlist, I'm like, well, they're no different than a lot of them.
Yeah, but they had some. They were. I remember it was one of the first. I don't want to say the first concerts I went to, but they came to my college to play because How You Remind Me just broke. And the bill was, they played the lunch hall. It was them, Saliva, and Default.
Wow.
It was a good show.
Yeah.
It was a good show. So I give them respect. I saw them.
Well,
yeah, man.
You've had one thing you're really talented with too is when you get those small windows where somebody they're just cranking out the interviews, they're in a hurry. I've noticed you are able to get them to warm up typically. They're like, oh, okay. And then a lot of times they've come back for the longer interviews. I mean, it's just, it's there's a certain technique, or you just do what you naturally do and they come back.
I think that just goes with, me shaping my personality and finding myself again through, just being honest, through therapy and life. And, I do watch interviews and listen to people on the radio and kind of become a student of the game. I'm sure as a musician, you don't listen to music the same way that I listen to it as just a fan who can't, I can't even play the triangle. So you listen to it differently. So as somebody who went to school for broadcasting, it's different for me to watch, because I've been to news stations to watch the news, knowing how, the meat is made or whatever it is. I know how everything is made, so I look at everything different. So with interviews, it always bothers me, just very stale, boring interviews that there's no connection, that all they're doing is promoting. They got to promote what they got to do. That's usually the interview. It's great if people just want to talk, but people got to make a thing, and that's part of it. But just to come into that, like you're just selling and hawking a product. So I just like being able to connect with them or make them laugh in some way. And again, or what you referred to before, I know Guns N' Roses management is aware of me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I hope it's a good. I want it to be a good thing. Right now, it doesn't seem to be, because there are interviews that could happen that are not, I guess, happening. And it's like I get it from one angle, because they're Guns N' Roses, they don't need me. But if these other people, if certain people are doing interviews with other people, but they're kind of like afraid to go on or concerned, or whatever the word you want to use, about going on a GNR podcast, I haven't taken the time to listen, because you Garrett, clearly have. That's the approach I have. Very honest approach. I definitely, I'm not a sycophant. I don't try to, nobody does anything wrong ever, but I look at everything very objectively. So that's how I get guests to come back. Why am I going to hit them with a hard question to make them feel uncomfortable? So I can get clickbait for a short news cycle? No, to get them back, to build myself, to build the Brando. Do you like that saying?
Yeah. Well,
to do that.
I am a firm believer that you're going to get at least two of the big three on there eventually. Because, I mean, you've interviewed, London Hudson twice. You've interviewed Susan Holmes McKagan twice, I believe.
Yeah.
Duff's brother. I mean, it's like you've pretty much done the circle around the family reunion. So, there's got to be plenty of folks who can vouch for you. But, I do kind of wonder, and I'm sure this is an obvious answer, but have you written down what the questions would be if you were to land an interview on short notice? Because I'm thinking, if it were me, I would probably write out a whole interview, and then I'd probably scrap it and second guess it and write a whole ton of questions. Is that like a moving process, or how does that work?
It's just, I don't know if I felt bad about myself when, or felt like a loser or a lazy when I read that in your syllabus that you sent me. Because I don't do that. I think maybe early on, I would really write out questions when I was really unsure of myself. Not to say that you have to be unsure of yourself to do that, but I think I've just learned my style, what works for me over time. Because if I have questions written out, like verbatim, I don't really, it just, I feel locked in. I kind of want to have a looseness to it, where I write down bullet points, and I kind of have I know where I want the conversation to go, kind of thing. And I take the natural progression of where it's going. So, I mean, if I get a call like, hey, Slash wants to do an interview right now, just as a Guns N' Roses fan, and being a horror fan, and just knowing what I know about Slash as a fan and doing this podcast, I know there would be no shortage of material.
Yeah.
But I get what would I really want to ask? And that's the thing. I'm not going to say I am going to get anything. Any guest that I've had, I consider myself very fortunate to get. So if I ever get to interview Duff or Splash or even Axl, holy crap! I mean, I could retire at this point. I mean, I'm proud of my. It's just it's ridiculous, but I don't know. I want the. I can just go off and just talk to them about whatever. It's not a big deal. I just with the management, I just want. I put it out there because it's hard not to get frustrated.
Yeah.
Because it's again where I don't think I deserve anything, but I don't know. I don't want you thinking anything bad about what I do. Because what am I going to really ask? That's going to be that bad. If you don't want to talk about new music, I won't talk about new music. If you don't want to talk about, if there's, I've done that from let's just get out of the GNL world. If there's somebody some actress that doesn't want to talk about her ex-marriage or something like that, don't talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that balance that I work with. But as long as I keep trying to prove my, doing what I do, I keep getting people to come on the show. So whether or not one of the big three comes on, it's not stopping me. It's a dream for sure. Even before this podcast came to be, that's just a dream, just as a fan. But I'm not counting my chickens. When I see those comments from listeners, I'm like, that's very nice that you think that. I don't, but I hope your positivity, somebody hears it.
I got nervous even just lining this thing up, not because, I was nervous to talk to Brando or anything, but it's like, I kind of built up that, all right, this is a big deal. Don't screw it up. But when I met Steven Adler almost 10 years ago, he's super laid back guy. It was really cool. I didn't get nervous or anything. And then, I've run into a couple people in the GRNR world, like Mark Cantor. I went to Cantor's Deli and he happened to be there a few summers ago, and I had my book with me, so I got out of the car and I was gonna have him sign it, and he was just the nicest dude. Like, he said, "Open it to page whatever," and I was like, "Okay," so I did, and he's like, "Yep, that's what I thought." This picture of Slash, there's always a rip seam. Like, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but any interview with Mark Cantor, he can name numbers, minutes of when something happened. I mean, he's so detail oriented. And so he's like, "Yep, you've got a torn scene on this book. Let me grab you a fresh one." So he goes to the kitchen, brings me a new book, signs it. And I mean, he's just the nicest dude. But when I met Dizzy Reed a few years ago, it was in Houston. It was at this place. It's like this little outdoor stage next to a lake and all this. And my wife and I got there kind of early to see the opener. And I walk out and I happen to notice that Dizzy Reed just happened to be standing next to the stage, just kind of looking around, scoping the place out. It was like a restaurant. And, of course, he had like Alex Grossi and everybody there. And so I was like, oh, we got to go meet him. He had just put his solo album out that week, and I had my GNR shirt. I was going to have him autograph it. And we go, and as I'm talking to him, he's autographing my shirt or whatever. My wife kind of laughs, and I look down and my hand was shaking. I guess I was like nervous and didn't even realize it. So I wonder, like, when's the most nervous you've gotten before an interview, or what would make you the most nervous if someone was to say, "Oh, hey, Axl's in studio," or something?
I mean, early on, I remember when it's funny coming off my previous comments, but like Bumblefoot won't come. He's politely declined coming on the podcast because I don't know specifics, but he has some sort of issue with I think management or Guns N' Roses. There's some sort of sore thing there, and he doesn't. I know he doesn't really want to talk about it. I mean, that's part of his life. I don't know. That's a whole thing. But he was technically my first radio interview when I was in Cape Cod, and I had never done an interview before. It was over the phone. We actually stayed in touch via MySpace, him and I, because I met him. This is again another, not to get sidetracked, but I met him at a show, and I guess happened to stay in touch with him. So I mean, like, I was nervous for that. I think I was nervous, like my first in studio with. I don't know if you're a wrestling guy to bring that up again, but Jeff Jarrett, he came in.
Oh wow!
With when I was working at a station in Poughkeepsie, and he was so nice. And this would be great if any of your audience or you know who Don West is. Don West was, when I was younger, me, my friends and I, however the proper English is, we used to watch QVC for the baseball cards. And they actually made fun of this on SNL. And Don West, I think he did announcing for TNA Wrestling, and that's what he was with Jeff Jarrett. And he was a kind of like a cult hero of mine as well. So early on. But, the first time I got to speak with Alice Cooper, first time I got to speak with, the only time I got to speak with Alice, the first time I got to speak with Dave, because Dave, you think like angry, like he's going to be, but, or Henry Rollins, I was nervous. I kind of get jittery a lot, like still, with certain people. I don't know if I've ever like flubbed anything or couldn't get through it where I'm freaking out. But and I think that's why it's important for me to be myself and to crack jokes, and it makes them lighten up and it makes me lighten up. So, I'm never going to say that, I'm too cool for school. That there's no, I'll still get nervous.
Well, that's cool that you're able to do that, because I mean, like, I'm not even like a huge Megadeth fan or anything, but you talk about, meeting Dave and what that, it's kind of like a high pressure thing. I'm thinking I'd get nervous, and I'm not even a huge, Megadeth guy, but that's pretty cool that you're able to do that. And I'm sure it gets better over the years, just interviewing all these different guests. But one thing I like to do with every guest to kind of close these podcasts out is I like to have like a big three. And the first of my big three questions would be, what are the three best concerts you've ever been to?
Probably, and maybe I'm biased. I think that my first best was got to be Axl DC.
Oh yeah.
Which was just like a phenomenal. I was lucky to get like good seats through radio, which doesn't often happen for me. Like, people don't think that either. That's another misconception. Or with radio, it's not like I was never that high level, but I happened to get good seats, which I didn't realize how close they would be. At Madison Square Garden, they were like 6 rows from the stage.
Oh wow.
And I had never been that close to Axl. I'd never seen AC/DC before. And Axl, I mean, I saw it firsthand. He still got it. It was incredible. That might be tied with Velvet Revolver that I saw at Starland Ballroom in New Jersey, which was special. My first time seeing Slash, and and Scott Weiland, and I was up front for that. I went up. My friends and I, we went early. We were like against the stage. And that was amazing. And I guess to be cliche, to be true to myself and my podcast, and I'm just being honest. I mean, there are other amazing concerts I've been to. Korn at Ozfest. I love seeing Coheed and Cambria, or the Ataris, or certain other a lot of crazy concerts and cool concerts I've been to. But to round out the top 3 would be seeing GNR in '02 with Buckethead. I mean, that was like seeing the Unicorn. Like, you never see Axl. Buckethead, what is that? So, and they canceled the tour like the next day. So, I mean, it's got to.
Oh,
it may vary.
I didn't realize it was that quickly after. Like, I knew that was pretty quick before, but I didn't know it was like that fast.
Yeah, it was I think it was the day after they were in Philly.
Wow.
Or I mean, it was the next day that it just went to the crap. And yeah, like, it was just. So I mean, with those 3, I don't know. It's hard to say like which one really is, like, if you want to say is the top one, but yeah, I think that's still appropriate for my top 3.
That's so cool. I almost got tickets to see AC/DC in Houston, but the cheapest ticket was $250 for like one by itself in the nosebleeds. I was like, nah, I'll just go see them, in 2 weeks in Dallas for cheaper. And then Brian Johnson left 2 days later. I was crushed. So like it would have been cool to see Axl DC, but I was still kind of licking my wounds over not getting to see Brian. So I'm hoping they do some sort of like one more tour after, COVID restrictions let up, but that'd have been a cool one to see. Yeah.
I'll certainly see if AC/DC does tour again, experience it with Brian, but I don't know, ever since being with Axl, hearing with Axl, like, I hear it when I listen to my own playlist. Like, that was such a really cool fit.
Yeah.
And he was special. So to see that, I saw really unique things. To see Velvet Revolver that close, and I had met Slash and Delph right before they were signing autographs behind the stage, or not the stage, the building. It was like a small little place in Jersey, the ballroom, and to see Axl in '02 with Buckethead, when which was half a tour. So I saw like special shows for that. So yeah, that was cool. But I mean, like, I got to see like the Foo Fighters in Worcester, Massachusetts. That was cool as hell. But I'm trying to think of. I always say this: always get a chance to see who you can, not just with the Brian Johnson thing. But speaking of what I was talking about, who I saw in college was Nickelback. Mitch Hedberg, the comedian. Do you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
He was coming, and he did come. And I bought tickets for friends who weren't students, and I just didn't want to go. And he died 3 months later.
Jeez.
So I'll never do that again.
I just saw a post yesterday. Who was Ty Zamora from Alien Ant Farm posted a picture with Mitch Hedberg just a couple days ago. It was like a throwback picture, but yeah, I just saw a picture of him.
I know, it's crazy. So it's what you try to do. That's why you mentioned ZZ Top. I made sure I got to see them when they came to Jones Beach, Long Island. I tried to see my girlfriend and I in 2020. We all got screwed with concerts, and I'm like, I want to see Elton John. I want to see Billy Joel. I got to see these people before they go.
Yeah.
I regret not seeing. I'm glad I saw Scott Weiland with Velvet, but I didn't see him with STP. I never got to see Chris Cornell. So it's like See, no, everybody's going to take advantage. I mean, concerts are going to thrive like crazy when they come back because we're never going to take them for granted again.
That's so true.
At least I'm not.
That's very true. Well, that's, my second of the big three are, it's who are three bands you're dying to see but haven't gotten to.
I really, really want to see Paul McCartney. I was lucky to see Ringo. That was one of the final concerts I got to see before the world went to shit.
Oh, wow.
So it's probably Ringo. Who else? I think a fun one. I don't know. I'm trying to think of. I would have friends that would go with me. Rammstein. I got to experience that. That might be crazy. Or Rammstein, or however you want to say it.
I remember in high school you were so edgy if you listened to Rammstein.
I know, and I wouldn't. In high school, I wouldn't. Then speaking of high school, I got to see Tool. I need to see Tool live. Yeah, I've never experienced that, and that's something I need to do. There you go, Paul. Here's the drop off. Paul McCartney, Tool, and Rammstein. I don't know. I see. My taste is eclectic. In addition to Guns N' Roses.
Well, if you get on YouTube, there's a lot of mashups of Beatles songs with modern artists, and it's hilarious how well they fit. Like they did Shaggy, Let It Be Me, and it's Let It Be with Wasn't Me, but it fits perfectly. And then they did Sgt. Pepper with Paradise City, so it's not too far of a stretch.
I know. That's why I love the Beatles. I love. Obviously, I obviously loved Guns N' Roses, but I'm never going to say the greatest band of all time. I think I give that to the Beatles. Honestly, I don't know. That's a conversation for another time.
Yeah. Well, my grand finale, and I kind of ask this of any guest, no matter what their career or field is, because it applies to everyone's life. But what is the funniest or craziest story you could tell from your career so far?
Oh God. You know what? This is a good one. This is a safe. This is like a PG, but it's funny. This is when I was working at WPDH in Poughkeepsie, and as I can't help but inject into a conversation, I'm Jewish. When I say it like that, I'm more of like a cultural Jew. I'm not practicing. If that makes whatever. Just look at Seinfeld. That's my family. Yeah. So I make that into my jokes. Like if at the time if I'm playing a Lenny Kravitz song, I'm like laugh. I'll call him like Lenny Kravitz. So I would make like jokes like that. And I was growing up, and this is the truth, I was really bitter against Christmas. I remember telling my grandma when I was 10 that I didn't want to be Jewish anymore so I could celebrate Christmas. Just like, because there's always Christmas stuff, Hanukkah sucks, all that stuff. But I'm using this I was making you laugh, so I'm using it as like a bit on air. And it's also the truth that the only thing really open on Christmas by the way, this is a radio story, are Chinese food places. Like that's kind of the joke. That's how Jews spend Christmas is Chinese food and movies because those are the only things that are open.
Wow.
Of course, pre-pandemic. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah, but I never actually just like thought about it being an actuality.
Yeah, it's just like of course, there's never like 100%, which is this in this case. So I went up there. I would always buy food on the way because when I would commute to Poughkeepsie from either Brooklyn or somewhere on Long Island at the time. So it was like a 2-hour drive. Not every day, so it wasn't too crazy. So I'm like, I'm going to get Chinese food on the way and bring it to the station. And I'm doing a nice 9-hour shift, which never happens. It's like, a smaller market station. Nobody wants to work on Christmas. I don't give a shit because I'm Jewish and I'm working on Christmas. I can use the money, whatever. I drive by the Chinese food place that I usually go to. It's closed. Great. So I'm like, I'm going to get what I can get, to get something before I settle down and do my air shift. The only thing open is a gas station. So I get like some mac and cheeses. Those, of course, burn in the microwave. So I'm like, I got to talk about this. I'm like, starved to death. So I start talking about this on the air, and somebody calls the request line, and this woman goes, "I'm outside with food for you." Really? Like, they're not going to stab me or anything. No, I'm on my way to my cousin's holiday party. I got sandwiches, I got cupcakes. So I go out there and she gives me food. And I go back on the air, come out of a Dire Straits song. And I talk about that I just experienced a Christmas miracle, that this little, Jewish kid's heart just experienced a Christmas miracle. That was, I don't know. That seems kind of weird. Right? In addition to all the bathroom stories I told you before.
I love it. Well, Brando, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. This is something I thought about a while back. I was like, man, I wonder if I can make that happen. That'd be a really cool episode to do. And so it means a lot that you did it. And I've modeled a lot of what I've done off of the work you've done. And so I think a lot of fans would also echo the statement, but we appreciate what you've done for the GNR community, kind of giving us something new every week when there's not a whole lot of new going on. So it's honor to have you here. Well,
I appreciate your time. I hope I didn't I didn't talk too much, because it's different being on this end where you're not in control of things. It's like in life where I'm not in control. I'm like, what am I good? Am I bad? What am I doing? I need some sort of barometer.
Well, that's kind of what gave me the idea. I thought, you've spent hours highlighting, what'd you say, you're on episode 200 and I lost count, but you've highlighted so many people's careers. I'm like, it'd be cool to hear about yours. So I really like this.
I appreciate it. Because I know I have had an interesting career. Again, I'm not like a high profile radio guy, but it is very weird. And those are the kind of people that I've met along the podcast way. Or, yeah, I get some of the bigger names, but also I love getting the not super high profile people, but their stories are ridiculous. They're either entertaining, they're inspiring. So I try to do that. I really try to do that, and I'm glad that people are enjoying it, because I don't know. I need that reassurance, because again, I'm in therapy, so it helps me through. So I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah. Well, real quick before you go, anyone who's listening to this for the first time, because I plan to share it on the GNR forum and everything, where would you direct first time listeners to listen to your podcast?
You can go to, let me just say, go to YouTube. I mean, you can really get the podcast anywhere you get podcasts, as they say, iHeartRadio or, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, all that fun stuff. But YouTube, the early episodes, like the first episodes with Scotto are on there. But there are also video interviews that you get to see, which I've done more during quarantine now that everybody, it's we're not doing this on Zoom, but so many of them are on Zoom. So you kind of get to see me and in my apartment in the back, my little background that I have now with my Axel Funko Pop or whatever, and talking to, John Densmore, Linda Perry, or Dave Mustaine, and just kind of get to meet me, because I think that's important. Because while I'm still old school radio, like theater of the mind, man behind the mic, theater of the imagination. In today's world, where there's so much content out there, you kind of want to know who you're dealing with. And I think I put myself out there, so you're getting Guns N' Roses, you'll get to meet the, Brandon or Brando, whatever. And hopefully, you like it. Again, Guns N' Roses, but the amount of different kind of guests on there is just something really cool that we can tie just to one thing, which is GNR.
That is so cool. Well, Brando, y'all I say y'all because I'm a Texas boy, but y'all stay safe up there in New York, and we'll get through this pandemic here pretty soon, I'm sure. And so, hopefully you get to make another return trip to Texas in the near future. We'll hit up that Whataburger and the Bucky stops I was talking about. But I'm looking forward to eventually meeting sometime. And as far as this episode goes, I'll let you know when it's posted. I don't know if soon's the word, but you'll get it.
Yeah. I know. We did some OT. We did a GNR show that goes on 3.5 hours or 4 hours, just using an appropriate analogy. But right on, man. I appreciate your time, Garrett.
Awesome. Well, you take care.
You too, bud.